How's everybody doing? It is Monday Morning Quarterback, episode 185. I hope you all had a fantastic week. The weather's getting nicer out. Hope you got to race last weekend. Race season's fixing to be hot and heavy here soon, so we're extremely looking forward to that. Tonight's topic is how to fix a bouncing race car. A shock tuner's worst nightmare. Getting the phone call on Monday morning, my car's bouncing, how do I fix it? Tonight we're going to talk about all of the things as a suspension tuner for the past 20-something years of my life. How do we fix a bouncing race car, and what are the things that we think about and the thought process with that? Before we dive into that, a question that came off of last week's bump rubber video, and that is, how long do one of these bump rubbers last? Great question. Should have covered it, didn't, but we're going to answer it now. It really depends on how you take care of it. So if you run a bump cup and your shock is shaft down, so your bump cup and your bump rubber here, and you go to the car wash and that bump cup gets filled with water and this thing sits in water for 2 or 3 days till it all drains out, and then you go race and this is still wet and you're squishing the heck out of it and it's still wet, it can split and fall apart and deteriorate really quickly. You might only get a few nights out of it. If it stays dry, most of the time you'll get a full season out of one of these, and in a micro, maybe a couple seasons, because we're not squeezing them as hard as we do on a sprint car. The progressive bump kits, we've got guys that have been using those for 4 or 5 seasons plus. It's a slightly different material than the foam, and then that material holds up a little bit better. That is one of the benefits to the bump spring, is it just longevity lasts a lot longer, and that's why you see some guys running the bump spring. The other thing is it's a shorter installed height. So as we talked last week, and the importance of setting bump gap, sometimes you just don't have enough room, and so if you have a shorter bump package, whether it's a rubber or a spring, sometimes that's advantageous. But I would say on a sprint car, unless this thing gets soaking wet and you try to run it when it's still wet, you should be able to get a full season out of them for sure. Another thing to cover, a question was, if you cut this to wrap it around the shock shaft because it's a pain in the neck to take your rod end off the particular shock you have, and you're worried about messing up your settings, what does that do? It totally changes the rate of the bump rubber. So we don't recommend to do that. We see people cut them and then put a piece of tape on there. You lose a lot of the rate of the bump rubber when you do that, because as you squeeze it, it's no longer a solid piece. It distorts. The energy doesn't necessarily push in the tire. It just blows the bump rubber out. So I don't recommend cutting a bump rubber unless you absolutely have to. I've done it before, like on the left front, where you're just cutting a rib off and you're slitting it to get it on the shaft quick and easy, dirty, but you're not really using it in that application for a bump rubber. It's more of a travel limiter, so I didn't really care what the rate was. But if you're using it on the left rear for a bump rubber, I wouldn't recommend cutting it. So, all right, tonight's topic, how do you fix a bouncing race car? Again, suspension tuner's worst nightmare. And the first thing I try to think about as a suspension tuner is, what's causing it to bounce? Well, obviously it's a rough racetrack, right? Or there's a hole in the racetrack. When I watch hot laps and I'm at a race, I'm constantly looking at the attitude and the platform of the car. Not only my customers that, are running CSI shocks, but other shock tuners, right? Qualifying's a great one to see. I love going to like Knoxville, where you can stand in the infield and get a really good visual from entry to the exit. What is the attitude of that car through there? Are there certain cars that are getting through the imperfections in a dirt track better than my customers? And if they are, why? If they're not, why? So a couple things go into play there. You have to think about the whole suspension package, and how it relates to what we're doing. So the suspension package as a whole, which would be the tire, how much air pressure is in the tire. That's just a big spring, right? The spring of the car, the torsion bar or a coilover spring, right? They're a spring rate. Are we softer or are we stiffer than somebody that's getting through the holes better? Bump rubber. Are we getting into the bump rubber too hard and that's upsetting the race car? There's a lot of things. Shock settings. I say this whenever I do my suspension seminars is we design the shocks, and any shock tuner is going to design the shocks to do a certain job, and a shock has a hard time overcoming a major deficiency in the setup. So if the track's really rough and you don't have enough air pressure in your right rear tire, the shock's going to have a hard time controlling that big bouncing spring of a tire because there's not enough air in it. It wasn't designed for that. So sometimes you might think and be like, man, that guy's got, his shock settings are messed up, when really it's just he has 7 pounds of air in the tire and there should be 10. So that's a big one. As a whole, typically softer suspension will get through holes better. You have to have, and when I say softer suspension, that could be softer torsion bars or a softer compression setting. You want to have a compression setting that is plush and soft on initial movement, but then not super harsh on the high speed. So if you have a progressive style dampening curve like we really prefer, or I prefer as a shock tuner, you don't want it mushy feeling, so it can't be too progressive, but you don't want it too harsh at high speed. So how do you dial that in as a suspension tuner? And is that potentially the reason that you're having a bounce? Is it the design of the piston? Or is it just a clicker setting? So a couple things to think about there, and some things that you as the end user can't control. You can't control what piston's in your shock unless you're building your own shocks. But suspension settings, the amount of rebound that's in the shock, you can change, and how much or how little gas pressure if you have a monotube shock. So there's a couple things we'll talk about if you're having excessive bounce in your race car that you can look at to try to minimize that. First will be air pressure. Do you have enough air pressure in your right rear tire? Now I know as you pump that tire up, you're going to lose grip. So it's a fine line there of it needs to hold the car up and make grip and not bounce. But if the track's really rough, do you have enough air in the tire? Is the driver driving the right line on the racetrack, or is he driving right through the center of that hole? Sometimes if there's just a big hole in one area of the track, you're going to be better suited to avoid that hole with the line you're driving than to tune your race car to drive right through that hole that is just one little fraction of the racetrack. There's a hole in 5% of the track, and we're going to have to do things and tune for you to drive right through that hole, and now we're going to sacrifice grip on the other 95% of the track. So do we just deal with it and drive through it because that's where you have to go? Or is it such a detriment to what you're doing and it's fouling up your whole corner and you're slowing your car down by 2, 3, 4/10 of a second a lap? We have to do something tuning wise. And we're going to just sacrifice grip in the other areas because it's such a problem. So do we have the right amount of air pressure in the car? Okay. If you're running a monotube gas shock, increasing gas pressure to a certain point will help the car get through holes. And typically we're talking right rear corner. When we see a bounce, usually it's related to the right rear corner of the car. Very rarely do you see a right front bouncing. That's the corner that gets loaded the most on corner entry, and that's typically where you see your bounces, is they start on corner entry or if you hit the cushion wrong. So spring rate, is that right? Gas pressure, can we come up on gas pressure a little bit to maybe calm it down? And then rebound settings. So nobody likes to take rebound out of the right rear if the track is losing grip, because now we're not going to keep that spring loaded as much and not going to keep the tire loaded as much. But if you decrease rebound settings or make your shock rebound faster, it'll get through a hole a heck of a lot better. And if you ask anybody that's ever tuned motocross suspension, you know, the more square edged and the harsher the whoop section gets, the more they call it speeding up the rebound, but they decrease rebound to let that tire return to the track quicker. If you have a lot of rebound and you hit the face of a jump, The tire needs to be able to return back to the track and not stay up in the air and just hit the square edge of the next jump. It'll make it much more harsh. But can you afford to take a little rebound out of the right rear corner to get through that hole better, knowing that you're going to lose grip on the rest of the racetrack? Because the rebound setting, you know, compression's kind of easy, right? Compression, you're setting to get through holes and different things, but the rebound is just controlling how fast the spring unwinds. Whether it's a torsion bar unwinding or a spring uncompressing, the rebound setting of the shock is just controlling how fast that thing can unwind itself. And then probably the last one I would look at for settings and how to fix a bouncing race car is compression. I think decreasing rebound is a more powerful change than increasing compression, because a lot of times when you increase compression, you make it harsher. Most instances, outside of our XT shock that has a low speed and a high speed adjuster, going up on low speed compression will make it a little bit harsher. So if you have an XT shock, then you have the ability to dial some high speed into it, but keep the low speed soft, so you have that plush initial feel, but then more firmness at high speed, which will help the oscillation of a tire hitting a bump. So to recap a few things: air pressure, spring rate, gas pressure in the shock, which is also spring rate, rebound settings, and then the last thing I would look at is compression settings. Certainly if this is an ongoing issue, talk to your suspension tuner. They might be able to help you look at a couple different things and settings you have on your race car to see if we can improve it, because if the driver's eyeballs are bouncing, he's probably not keeping his foot on the gas, and can't win races if your foot isn't on the gas. So hope you enjoyed tonight's topic. Next week we're back in the shop with some cool videos we've been filming. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That helps us tremendously. Share this video with your friends, and we hope you all have a great week.